Ang aming layunin ay maglabas lamang ng katotohanan at maghatid ng katarungan. I now turn it over to Vice Chair Rico Bernabe to explain the merits of the case.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Magandang umaga po sa ating lahat. To provide a clear understanding of the matter, we will present the background of the entire Mayo case in several chapters, simplifying the details for easier comprehension. We now proceed with the very first chapter of this case, which is the drug transaction. On October 8, 2022, at 12:38 p.m., Sergeant Rodolfo B. Mayo was captured on CCTV at the Wealth and Personal Development and Lending Office located at Abad Santos, Tondo, Manila, carrying a white paper bag, boarding his silver Mitsubishi Montero, and leaving shortly thereafter. As shown in the footage, Sergeant Mayo, wearing a white shirt, returned to his car carrying a white paper bag of what is believed to contain 2 kilograms of shabu. Please note that the WPD Lending Office is registered to a private corporation beneficially owned by Sergeant Mayo. Between 12:42 to 1 p.m. on the same date, members of the Special Operating Unit Region 4A, SOU 4A for brevity, a unit under the Philippine Drug Enforcement Group, or PDEG, led by team leader Captain Jonathan Susongco, conducted an anti-illegal drug operations at Bambang Street, Tondo, Manila, resulting in the arrest of Sergeant Mayo for selling 2 kilograms of shabu. Notably, the operation was unreported and undocumented. The members of the operating team at Bangbang are as follows: Captain Jonathan Susongco, Patrolman Romar Bugarin, Patrolman Hasan Calao, Sergeant Carlos Bayeta, Patrolman Justin Peter Gular, and Patrolman Dennis Carolina. Although officially unreported and undocumented, the fact of the said buy-bust operation is evidenced by admissions and testimonies of and Viber messages between PNP officials. We now proceed to the next chapter of this case, which is the spoils of war, the discovery of the large drug haul. Now, we mentioned earlier that Sergeant Mayo was arrested at Bangbang Street. However, instead of officially reporting the arrest and complying with the chain of custody rule, members of the SOU 4A with Sergeant Mayo in custody proceeded to the WPD Lending Office for an alleged follow-up operation in anticipation of a large drug haul. CCTV footage shows the silver Mitsubishi Montero returning to the WPD Lending Office at around 1 p.m. on the same date. As shown in the footage, the operative in blue alighting from the silver Mitsubishi Montero is Captain Susongco, while the rest are members of his operating team, SOU 4A. Inside the WPD Lending Office, the operatives of the SOU 4A discovered a massive stash of shabu. Between 1:39 p.m. and 2:16 p.m., Sergeant Mayo was escorted into the WPD Lending Office and back to his vehicle 3 times. The theory is that Sergeant Mayo was directed to open the vaults located inside. Moreover, as can be observed in the footages, in all 3 instances, Sergeant Mayo was in handcuffs, which corroborates the drug transaction and this arrest in Bangbang Tondo, narrated earlier in Chapter 1. The third chapter of the Mayo case will show operatives hauling away large portions of the drugs, among others, located at a WPD lending office. From 1:48 to 2:20 p.m., members of the Intelligence and Foreign Liaison Division, IFLD for brevity, under the PIDEG group, were seen misappropriating from the large amounts of shabu found at the WPD lending office. As shown in the footage, from 1:48 to 1:51 p.m., Sergeant Lorenzo Catarata misappropriated one medium-sized luggage of shabu as it was loaded inside the white Honda Civic. Validated information from the PNP reveal that the white Honda Civic is owned by Sergeant Catarata. Thereafter, at 2:13 p.m., Sergeant Catarata and Sergeant Arnold Tibay can be seen in the footage misappropriating one luggage filled with shabu by carrying it on board a red Yamaha NMAX motorcycle. It can be noticed that the white Honda Civic and the red Yamaha NMAX are seen going in the same direction to the right, as there is reportedly a safe house in that area. At 2:05 p.m., Sergeant Jerwin Rebosora can be seen carrying one duffel bag and placing it inside the black car through its left rear door. As observed, the white Honda Civic and the red Yamaha NMAX returned to the WPD lending office from the rightmost area where the safe house is reportedly located. And at 2:20 p.m., Sergeant Catarata and Sergeant Rebosora can be seen loading one dark luggage in the trunk of the same white Honda Civic. For the next slides, we will show you screenshots of CCTV footages taken from the report of the PNP Special Investigation Task Force Group 990, which identified the respondent police officers. So here we see Sergeant Lorenzo S. Catarata. Next is Sergeant Jerwin Rebosora. And then here we have Sergeant Arnold Tibay. The operatives seen in the next slides are part of the operating unit that arrested Sergeant Mayo at Bangbang Street, who likewise participated, either directly or indirectly, in the misappropriation of drug evidence. Here is Captain Sosonko, the team leader in the arrest of Sergeant Mayo at Bangbang, and then the members of his operating team, SOU-4A, who failed to account the drug evidence at the WPD lending office. So how were we able to conclude that the contents of the haul are shabu? Because days after the incident, Colonel Rolando Portera, then chief of the IFLD, upon witnessing the acts committed by subordinates in the footage, directed them to explain. Sergeant Rebosora admitted to Colonel Portera that the operatives, quote-unquote, saved more or less 30 kilograms of shabu, intended as a reward for their confidential informant, a patently illegal act and a blatant violation of the Comprehensive Drugs Act of 2002, among other laws. This was duly reported by Colonel Portera to Domingo, who directed the return of the saved drugs. Colonel Portera then facilitated the return of the misappropriated shabu, wherein 42 kilograms of said shabu was recovered in front of the Public Safety Mutual Benefits Fund Inc. building near Camp Crame. It is noted that the investigation report dated October 26, 2022 from the Chief IFLD states that the said 42 kilograms was packaged in green Chinese tea bags. Similarly, as seen in the pictures of the drugs seized at the WPD lending office, they are likewise packed in green Chinese tea bags. The image also shows the vaults mentioned earlier, which we theorized Mayo was directed to open. Additionally, it can be observed that some of the shabu is stored in pieces of luggage, similar to those loaded by the operatives into different vehicles. Subsequently, from 2:28 p.m. to 5:34 p.m., packages and parcels were visibly carted away from the WPD lending office as follows. As shown in the footage, from 2:28 to 2:31 p.m., Sergeant Tibay alighted from the black sedan and headed towards the WPD lending office, where operatives were loading more or less 19 packages into an L300 van as estimated by the PNP. Captain Sosonko can also be seen talking to operatives and looking for CCTV cameras in the area. At 4:41 p.m., an operative was seen carrying several paper and plastic bags from the WPD lending office before heading back. And from 5:21 to 5:34, upon the direction of Major Salmingo, Lieutenant Cabral and Patrolman Venegas were seen carrying green eco bags from the WPD lending office. So in this screenshot, we see Captain Sosonko, who in the first video of this chapter we seen looking for CCTV cameras in the area. And then here we have Lieutenant Cabral and Patrolman Venegas. We note that aside from the members of the SOU-4A and IFLD earlier identified, other police officers who arrived at the WPD lending office are as follows. So we have Marian Mananghaya, a member of the IFLD, who arrived at 3:03 p.m. And we have Ashraf Amirol, team leader of the IFLD, who arrived at 3:42 p.m. We now proceed to the next chapter of the Mayo case, which pertains to the cover-up. Due to reports of a large and unprecedented drug haul and the involvement of a PDEG officer, the following high-ranking officials of the PNP arrived at the WPD lending office from 3:45 p.m. to 4:30 p.m. as follows. Colonel Olonan is the chief of the SOU-4A. He arrived at the WPD lending office at 3:45. As shown in the footage, he may be seen alighting from a black pickup truck and entering the WPD lending office. Lieutenant Colonel Ibanez, the officer in charge of the SOU-NCR, and Major Salmingo arrived at the WPD lending office at 3:54 p.m. Lieutenant Colonel Ibanez was the officer in charge of SOU-NCR, the same unit where Sergeant Mayo belongs to. Police Brigadier General Domingo, the then Chief of PIDEG, arrived at 3:59 p.m. As shown in the footage, General Domingo, wearing a shirt and black shorts, alighted from a white AUV and entered the WPD landing office. Lastly, Lieutenant Colonel Gonzalez, a former member of the IFLD. He arrived at the WPD landing office at 4:29 p.m. As shown in the footage, he can be seen wearing a black shirt and pants before proceeding to the WPD landing. So we are showing you images of Colonel Olonan, Colonel Gonzalez, Major Salmingo, Colonel Ibanez, and General Domingo. So to reiterate, between 3:45 to 4:30 p.m., the senior officers arrived, including Lieutenant Colonel Ibanez, who is the superior of Sergeant Mayo, and General Domingo, the head of PIDEG, presumably to approve the final details of the narrative to be declared. Remember that there was no official declaration of any arrest or any anti-illegal drug operation as of this time. At 4:45, the anti-illegal drugs operation was finally formally declared, wherein they stated that a buy-bust operation was conducted, resulting in the arrest of a certain Ney S. Atadero, the caretaker of the WPD lending office, and the seizure of the remaining drugs, which would later turn out to be approximately 990 kilograms of shabu. Notably, Sergeant Mayo was excluded from the declared buy-bust operation. The first part of the cover-up therefore pertains to the decision to exclude Sergeant Mayo from the report and inventory of the anti-illegal drugs operation at the WPD lending office, and instead implicate his employee, Ney Atadero. This false narrative was used by the operatives in official documents, such as the report by General Domingo to the Acting Director for Operations. As you can see in the document, General Domingo reported that a buy-bust operation was conducted at 4:45 p.m. on October 8 at the WPD lending office, resulting in the arrest of Atadero only and the seizure of more or less 990 kilograms of shabu with an estimated standard drug price of approximately 6.7 billion. The same false narrative was further used in the submissions before the DOJ and the court. However, CCTV footage shows that no buy-bust operation was conducted at 4:45 p.m. at the WPD lending office. So we are showing you the footage at 4:45 p.m. We now move to the next chapter, the game of the generals. The first part of the cover-up, as earlier stated, pertains to the decision to exclude Sergeant Mayo from the declared buy-bust operation at 4:45. Now, the second part of the cover-up pertains to the decision to release Sergeant Mayo under the guise of a follow-up operation. As may be recalled, Lieutenant Colonel Ibanez is the boss of Sergeant Mayo, who both belong to SOU NCR. Thus, to ensure his release, Lieutenant Colonel Ibanez attempted to induce Domingo and Colonel Olonan by stating that there is a larger warehouse in Pasig City, quote-unquote, na ituturo ni Mayo. At 6:24 p.m., Lieutenant General Benjamin D. Santos Jr., the then Deputy Chief for Operations, arrived at the WPD lending office. As shown in the footage, Lieutenant General Santos alighted from a black SUV and entered the WPD lending office. Now, after Lieutenant General Santos left at 7:19 p.m., General Domingo, Colonel Olonan, Colonel Obañez, Colonel Gonzalez, and Major Zulmingo converged at the right side of the building and brainstormed on whether, quote-unquote, tutuluyan or tutulungan si Sergeant Mayo. So all of these quotes that we are saying and all of these are produced in evidence and are corroborated by various testimonies and affidavits which have been threshed out by the commission and can be provided in the decision itself. No? So giving into the inducement, General Domingo and Colonel Alonan approved Sergeant Mayo's release. So here's the picture of Lieutenant General Benjamin D. Santos. As alleged by General Domingo, Sergeant Mayo's release was cleared by then Chief PNP Rodolfo S. Azurin Jr. and Lieutenant General Santos. During the hearing before the Senate Committee on Public Order and Dangerous Drugs on May 30, 2023, he stated that, quote-unquote, the Chief PNP, Azurin, and the then TDCO, Santos, approved my proposal. Sergeant Mayo and Colonel Ibanez assured me also, by the way, that they can pinpoint another warehouse with much, much bigger stocks of illegal drugs. This corroborates our earlier conclusion that Lieutenant Colonel Ibanez induced General Domingo to release Sergeant Mayo by claiming that the latter knows of another warehouse containing more drugs. At around 7:45 p.m., PNP operatives were seeing the footage removing Sergeant Mayo's handcuffs. Thereafter, at 7:50 p.m., Major Salmingo, together with Sergeant Mayo, left the WPD lending office to conduct a quote-unquote follow-up operation in Pasig City. The said operation later on will turn out to be just a mere service of a warrant of arrest. In the joint affidavit of arrest of the members of SOU-NCR, it was stated that Sergeant Mayo was the arresting officer of Juden Francisco at Sorrento Oasis in Pasig City. Here we can see Sergeant Mayo wearing a black face mask and blue PNP shirt, appearing to arrest Juden Francisco. So in the next two slides, we will show you the members of SOU-NCR involved in the service of warrant of arrest against Juden Francisco, wherein Sergeant Mayo was made the arresting officer. We now move to the last chapter, the solution, wherein PNP officials concocted a scenario to cover the slew of irregularities. To recall, we have established that Sergeant Mayo was already arrested between 12:40 to 1 o'clock p.m. at Bangbang Street for selling 2 kilograms of shabu. We have also established that Sergeant Mayo was brought to the WPD lending office under the custody of PNP at 1:39 p.m. until 7:50 p.m. and that the declared buy-bust operation at 4:45 p.m. was conducted solely against Atadero, excluding Sergeant Mayo. Lastly, it has been established that Sergeant Mayo was released from police custody and assigned as an arresting officer against Juden Francisco. Now, former PIDEA Director General Wilkins Villanueva learned of the release of Sergeant Mayo and texted then Chief PNP Rodolfo Azurin that, quote-unquote, according to the team leader of the operating team in Abad Santos, the PIDEG leadership did not want to include the police officer in the arrest of Mayo because it will affect their reputation. That is why they released him. According to him, it was the arrested police officer who is disposing the items, end quote. This prompted General Azurin to direct General Domingo to return Sergeant Mayo to the WPD lending office. However, we recall that the buy bust was already declared at 4:45 p.m. only against Atadero, and that the inventory has already begun. Thus, in an attempt to address the irregularities in Sergeant Mayo's earlier arrest and to cover up his subsequent release, Colonel Olonan, Captain Piñon, and his team staged a hot pursuit operation against Sergeant Mayo. It was reported that this alleged operation took place at Quiapo Bridge, Quezon Boulevard, Quiapo, Manila at 2:30 a.m. on October 9, 2022, resulting in the arrest of Sergeant Mayo and the seizure of 2 kilograms of shabu. Flashed on the screen is Sergeant Mayo wearing a white shirt and black cap, being arrested at Quiapo Bridge, and the 2 kilograms of shabu laid on his vehicle. What is very telling is that earlier, during the arrest of Juden Francisco, Sergeant Mayo, as the arresting officer, was seen wearing a blue PNP shirt, while in this picture, we can see that Sergeant Mayo was made to change his outfit. So in the next 2 slides, we will show you the members of those involved in the simulated hot pursuit operation. Here are other police officers who were also found liable throughout the incidents in different capacities. So this concludes the narration of the background of the Mayo case. We now proceed to discuss the developments in the administrative cases filed against the respondents. On December 13 and 19, 2024, and January 6 and 9, 2025, the NAPOLCOM and Bank resolved all the remaining cases covering 99 summary dismissal cases involving 56 respondents. As resolved by the NAPOLCOM and Bank, 21 respondents were dismissed from the service, 16 respondents were demoted in rank, 4 respondents were suspended for 6 months, and 12 respondents' cases were dismissed. With respect to the 3 respondents who are presidential appointees, our recommendation for dismissal from the service shall be subject to the confirmation by the Office of the President. Relative to the administrative case against Lieutenant General Santos, the summary dismissal proceedings against him was suspended on account of a writ of preliminary injunction issued by Judge Alice Gutierrez, Branch 193 of the Marikina City Regional Trial Court. Shown on the screen is a summary of the penalties imposed on the respondents. Flashed on the screen is the chart of the personalities involved or mentioned throughout the incident. It is estimated that 1.5 tons of shabu comprise the accounted and unaccounted haul in the Mayo case, with an estimated street value of 10.151 billion. And that concludes our presentation. Thank you.